China conducts live fire drills and sends nuclear bombers in their latest harassment of Taiwan. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. I'm sure this week a lot of you have been pretty focused on following the situation in Afghanistan. So you may have missed that China was conducting live fire drills near Taiwan. According to Taiwan's defense ministry, 11 Chinese aircraft entered its air defense zone, including 2 nuclear-capable H-6K bombers and 6 J-16 fighters. A senior official familiar with Taiwan security planning told Reuters that China's Air Force had carried out a capturing air supremacy drill. The drills happened somewhere here, between Taiwan Island and the Taiwanese Pratas Islands. Some aircraft also entered the Bashi Channel, a strategic pass that leads to the Pacific. China has been constantly harassing Taiwan with military incursions into Taiwanese airspace. A senior Taiwanese official told Reuters that, in addition to seeking air supremacy over Taiwan, they have also been conducting frequent electronic reconnaissance and electronic interference operations. That's a fancy way of saying China is trying to learn how the US, Japanese, and Taiwanese military communicate, so it can jam transmissions. That way, the US and Japan won't easily be able to coordinate with Taiwanese forces in the event of an invasion. So the question obviously is, why have the live fire drills now? Well, according to the statement by the PLA, it's because the US and Taiwanese forces have repeatedly colluded in provocation and sent serious wrong signals, severely infringing upon China's sovereignty and severely undermining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Which is a fancy way of saying, because we felt like it. Earlier this month, the Biden administration approved a $750 million arms sale to Taiwan, including the howitzer artillery system. This is a continuation of large-scale arms sales to Taiwan, started under the Trump administration. That came to $5 billion in just 2020 alone. But there's another likely reason for the timing of these drills. As we mentioned earlier this week in an episode about China and the Taliban, the Chinese Communist Party is using the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and the subsequent collapse of Afghan forces to the Taliban as a warning to Taiwan. That came in this editorial from my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times. They wrote, "The situation in Afghanistan suddenly saw a radical change after the country was abandoned by the U.S., and Washington just left despite the worsening situation in Kabul. Is this some kind of omen of Taiwan's future fate? From what happened in Afghanistan, Taiwan should perceive that once a war breaks out in the Straits, the island's defense will collapse in hours and the U.S. military won't come to help. As a result, Taiwan's authorities will quickly surrender, while some high-level officials may flee by plane." The threat in comparison is pretty clear. So by holding live fire drills, including nuclear-capable bombers, the Chinese Communist Party wants Taiwan to start doing the calculations, rely on questionable U.S. support, or make a deal with the Communist Party now. This is actually the message the Chinese regime has been sending throughout Asia since the Scarborough Shoal incident in 2012. The Scarborough Shoal is here, very close to the Philippines, but also claimed by China. Filipino fishermen have been using the shoal for generations, but in 2012, China sent its maritime militia to the shoal to occupy it. Now, the U.S. has a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines, and when it started to look like China and the Philippines would actually come to blows over the shoal, the U.S. had to step in. Under President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden, the U.S. brought both sides to the table and got them to both agree to leave the shoal. The following week, the Philippines ships left the Scarborough Shoal and returned home. The Chinese, however, stayed in the area. And then the U.S. did nothing. China still occupies the Scarborough Shoal to this day. It was shocking, even to the Chinese regime. It looked as if the U.S. couldn't be counted on to defend its allies against China. And so the Chinese regime began what it calls the Scarborough model. The Scarborough model is a template for China gradually to exert control over the Western Pacific by snapping up one land feature at a time, a sort of incremental revisionism that slowly squeezes out the U.S. without ever providing a reason for a confrontation. That's when China accelerated building these man-made islands in the South China Sea. The U.S. told China to stop. They didn't listen. So the U.S. said, okay, fine, just don't militarize them. And the Chinese regime promised not to. In fact, Xi Jinping said this in a joint press conference with President Obama during his state visit to the White House. Relevant construction activities that China are undertaking in the Spratly Islands do not target or impact any country, and China does not intend to pursue militarization. Then China put missile launchers on the islands and started calling them necessary military facilities. The Chinese Communist Party knows a war for Taiwan would be a disaster for China, which is why there's a propaganda campaign, backed up by frequent military incursions into Taiwan's air defense zone. China wants to convince Taiwan there's no hope of winning, so they will surrender without a fight. And without clear messaging from the U.S. on Taiwan, China's propaganda might just work. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a member of the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, fans who support us and our efforts to expose the truth about the Chinese Communist Party by contributing to the crowdfunding website Patreon. Logan asks, how much do you think the CCP had to do with Afghanistan falling so quickly? It's a very good question, Logan. A few weeks ago, Chinese officials met with Taliban leaders, and the CCP has certainly been using the U.S. failure in Afghanistan as a propaganda boon, as I talked about earlier. The Taliban presents a lot of opportunities for the Chinese regime, which is why, so far, it's keeping its embassy open and not recalling Chinese citizens. And then there's this.
The country's foreign ministry said China is ready for, quote, friendly and cooperative relations with the Taliban.
At the same time, the CCP doesn't want Afghanistan thrown into chaos. So the Chinese regime is making a political calculation on how much they can trust the Taliban. The biggest indication of that will be how much investment they start pumping into Afghanistan. If the money starts flowing, that means the CCP thinks it can maintain good relations with the Taliban, and may have had a hand in their rise. Thanks for your question and your support, Logan. And a big thank you to everyone who supports China Uncensored on Patreon. We could not do this show without you. So thank you for joining us in the fight to expose the Chinese Communist Party to the world. If you're interested in joining, head over to patreon.com/China Uncensored. You'll get a bunch of cool perks, including the chance to have me answer your question on the show. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.